entitled The Rise and Fall of the Second Trump Reich. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Every incident that I mentioned in this article is based on an actual statement or action by Donald Trump, the people closely surrounding him, or something Trump has praised about his role model, Viktor Orban, the dictator of Hungary. So it was a hell of a year, 2025, the first year of the Trump Reich, or the First Reich, as Democrats refer to it, or the New America, as Trump refers to it. His slogan, one people, one nation, one leader. He has now declared himself president for life. He tells us America is now truly great. It all started with the election of November 2024, when the no-labels candidacy of Larry Hogan and Joe Manchin pulled enough electoral votes away from Trump and Biden, even though Biden was 10 million votes ahead of Trump, that none of those three tickets hit the 270 votes necessary to win the Electoral College. As a result, the election was thrown into the House of Representatives, and there are 26 Republican-controlled congressional delegations, and so on a 26-24 vote, the House of Representatives voted Donald Trump into office as president. At his swearing in, he promised to be a dictator for the day and pardoned himself, pardoned all the Republicans who were in Congress back on January 2021 and helped to organize and support the attack on the Capitol, and all the seditionists, the January 6th seditionists, let them out of jail. He then announced that the 24 Democrats leading their congressional delegations who'd voted against him in the House were guilty of sedition against the United States, and each was arrested and taken into custody. The arrests of those Democratic members of the House and a handful of Democratic senators from red states gave the Republicans a majority in the House and Senate, even though Democrats had won both bodies in the election. Jim Jordan became the new Speaker of the House. Rick Scott took over Mitch McConnell's job. And the next day, Donald Trump signed a new version of Schedule F, his changes to the civil service law, firing 50,000 federal employees. This is the day after he was inaugurated, firing 50,000 federal employees, including in the Department of Defense. All of those people were replaced within a day or two because a billionaire-friendly think tank, supported by billionaires, had come up with a bunch of billionaire-friendly candidates. They just rolled them in. Within a week, another series of political arrests took place as Joe and Hunter Biden, Liz Cheney, Merrick Garland, Jack Smith, Brad Raffensperger, Letitia James, and multiple other federal and state judges and prosecutors were arrested for conspiracy and alleged RICO violations. President Trump said, America will never again tolerate lawlessness by its elected and appointed officials. He announced this in a primetime message to the country, and both the media and the Republican politicians were quick to point out that Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln did worse than Trump had done. Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus. Andrew Jackson ignored the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court in a 6-3 ruling declared hate crimes unconstitutional, calling them thought crimes, with Justice Sam Alito saying, we'll never allow America to become the dystopian nanny state characterized in the writings of Orwell or Lewis and craved by Democrats. So within hours of their announcement, the Supreme Court's announcement that there's no more hate crimes in America, over 200 people, most queer or black, lay dead across the United States. Trump went on TV to calm the nation, again saying there are very fine people on both sides. That weekend, hundreds of thousands of Americans poured into the streets to protest. Trump called another press conference and declared a state of emergency provoked by what he calls a nationwide insurrection. Tens of thousands of Army troops met the crowds in the streets, and in 11 cities and a half dozen rural areas used live ammunition to kill several dozen protesters. Joy Reid began her Monday MSNBC show following that weekend with the song 4 Dead in Ohio, and was arrested on air for inciting further insurrection. Trump then referred her network, its executives, and several of its hosts to the FCC for investigation, as he had promised to do last year. CNN throws in with Trump, joining Fox and the big three national networks, explaining to America how Trump's changes are actually far less draconian than things previous presidents, particularly Lincoln, had done. Trump again invoked the Patriot Act to continue to hold the hundreds of elected and appointed Democratic officials, thugs, and sedition ringleaders in secret detention center without access to lawyers or other due process. The media pointed out this is nothing unusual. Bush and Cheney did the same thing hundreds of times, and some of their victims are even still in Gitmo without ever having a legitimate day in court. Nobody, the media said, of any real stature objected. Given the large number of people coming under detention as protests spread across the country, Trump signed an executive order transferring billions out of the military budget so that Halliburton and 2 other private prison contractors could build detention centers where bad people can be concentrated in one place. The media refuses to call them concentration camps because that's a prejudicial phrase. Trump then ordered the Pentagon to withdraw all forms of assistance from Ukraine, including military and diplomatic support. He said, Putin is merely liberating Ukraine from the Nazis that took it over when they stole the election from Yanukovych. They never should have turned their back on their Slavic partner, the nation that birthed them. And then he ended the speech with his campaign slogan from 2024 election, blood and soil. In an executive order titled No More S-Hole Countries, he outlawed all immigration and banned all tourist visas from Muslim and majority black countries, except for those from Saudi Arabia and Oman, where they are building a $5 billion Trump Tower as we speak. That was started in July of last year, by the way. This is true. Republicans in the House and Senate passed emergency legislation ending all U.S. gun restrictions with a single exception. Anybody who's been arrested or credibly accused of sedition and not pardoned can no longer own a weapon of any sort. Attorney General Jeffrey Clark then declared anybody who's ever joined the Democratic Party or voted for a Democrat in the past decade is now considered credibly accused of sedition and can no longer own weapons. Congress followed that up with billions to hire at least 1 million new local and state police, as Trump announced he's integrating the Proud Boys into the federal military, calling them the Storm Front, a shout out to QAnon. That was January. February of 2025. In the first week of the month, the Supreme Court handed down its 6-3 decision in Loper-Bright, gutting every federal protective regulatory agency. Trump immediately fires most of the employees of the EPA and the Department of the Interior, promising to sell all federally owned public lands. Disney and Comcast then submit bids to buy and manage Yellowstone. Congress then declares the Medicare experiment is over because more than half of seniors have voted with their feet, and they end the program, mandating all people over 65 must buy an Advantage plan from one of a handful of approved insurance giants. Following on that, Congress rolled out Social Security Advantage, a program that will, over the next decade, privatize all Social Security accounts via J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, and the Bank of America. Proclaiming America will no longer use her tax dollars to support blue state communists and keeping a 2023 campaign promise, Trump ordered all military bases closed in any state with a Democratic seditionist governor or seditionist-controlled legislature. He gave states 60 days to change the composition of their governments. All who didn't comply are now seeing their facilities and jobs move to red states. Congress then passed legislation closely resembling Putin's laws in Russia and Orban's in Hungary, declaring homosexuality and transsexuality deviant behaviors subject to federal penalties, fulfilling his 2022 campaign promise to pass two genders legislation. The fake news media is a major crisis, Trump told the nation from a press scrum near his helicopter. The solution, he said, would be straightforward. Congress voted later that day to rewrite the nation's libel laws, as Orban did in Hungary and Putin did in Russia, so that any journalist or commentary who sullies the reputation of any elected official can be subjected to both civil and criminal penalties. Within 3 weeks of that legislation being signed into law at the end of February, hundreds of writers and TV commentators have either been arrested or bankrupted as newsrooms across the nation purged themselves of anti-American voices. That would be anti-Trump voices. Proud Boys, now licensed by 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court and integrated into the military, began organized attacks on black neighborhoods, gay bars, and libraries. Dozens of people died, touching off riots in several cities, particularly Portland and Seattle, that were covered breathlessly by Fox so-called news. Trump pointed to the unrest and announced a second round of billion-dollar contracts for Halliburton to build camps for bad people, including those guilty of libel, violating gender conformity laws, or poisoning the blood of America through biracial marriages or giving shelter to illegal immigrants. In a major law and order speech, Trump declared homelessness a federal crime, and work camps were set up inside the new concentration camps for homeless people to learn skills so work can make them free. Arbeit macht frei. Volunteer Proud Boy units were dispatched to help police departments round up those who insisted on living in the streets. Based on the Comstock Act, which is still law but hasn't been enforced since the 1950s, The Republicans on the Supreme Court outlawed mifepristone and all hormonal birth control, along with IUDs and condoms. Republicans passed legislation declaring that life begins at conception. U.S. attorneys have started charging women who get abortions in blue states over the past year with murder. The Attorney General announced that all miscarriages must be reported to local police for investigation. And in the last week of February, Russia launched a final assault on Ukraine with the aid of their new Freedom Bloc allies, China, Iran, and North Korea. Ukraine fell, and Trump hailed a new era of world peace. So that's January and February. I've got, March and April and May. I mean, it just continues. But it's all, like I said, this is all based on things Trump has said he's going to do. And I think you'll find it fascinating, including a war with Mexico. I wrote that into here. And the wars in Europe, Australia, the Democratic Party being officially banned as insurrectionists. All these things that Trump and the people around him have suggested. You can read all about it over at HartmannReport.com. We'll be right back.